See you later, man. All right, Alex. I'm gonna select out the stream. You just make sure it's up. Doesn't sound like shit. It'd be nice. We're good? Okay. All right, we're gonna get started on the second 2-hour session on React and now Redux too. If you want to hang out in here and just work on your project or whatever, you can. Just please, try to keep your voices down or whatever. Cool. So I slacked out in the Saturday classes channel the repo that we were using last week. Haven't touched it since then, so it's exactly the same as we left it. We're going to kind of leave off there. We had one more component that I wanted to break out of this main app right here. Just to kind of break things down a little bit further, show how we can make things a little bit more usable. And then we're going to replace all of this with Redux. So we're going to look at Redux today too. And any other questions you have in React, we can try to cover. The Redux will probably take us at least an hour. Just explain it all, kind of go through what Redux is. So any questions on anything that we had left that we hadn't finished, or that you just had questions left over that we never answered? Anything like that? No?
Props.
Props. I know we used that. I'm trying to remember where we used it. I think we used it in these. Oh, was it in the app? Oh, the just right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the spread operator, or sometimes it's called rest, depending on where it's used. Does anyone want to try to explain that? Can we?
So whatever got passed into it, you just assign it. Is that what it is?
Not quite. It's similar. Vaughn, you got an idea?
Take a copy of the existing list and what we have and have it.
Yep. Makes a copy of the existing list or object that we're spreading over and puts it into whatever we're telling it to put into, in this case, an array. So we have an array of users, user 1, 2, and 3, right? You do ... users surrounded by those brackets. So that's the array notation, right? When we put something in brackets, we're saying take user 1, 2, and 3. Let's take them out of the original array and put them in this new array. So it's a way to make a quick copy. So users 1, 2, and 3 aren't copies, but we're not in the original array. So we can't make changes to the original array that would then cause changes throughout our app unexpectedly, So that's what the spread does. And it works the same in an object. You have properties in an object, and you do ... on that object, and you put it in another object. You're going to be copying all the properties and the property values to the new one. So it's effectively the same as the array, except for instead of copying array values, you're copying object values. And just popping it into a new object. So the spread is really useful. We're going to use that all over the place, and you'll probably want to use it a lot in the future too. So what are we going to break out today? Well, the first thing I want to break out is we have this sweet list. And let me pull up the app just so we can see it again. Woo. My mouse died, so I'm working off the trackpad, and I hate trackpads. So we have, we're going to do user's name. Right? And then we can hit add user. It has a weird box, and it puts it in the list. Joe Smith. Basically, it's just a list. It's nothing crazy, right? But we wanted to show several different components, how we could build them. And it took us a while to get here because we wanted to be very thorough. All right. Let's go ahead and minimize that window. So now what we want to do, since last week, we spent a lot of time breaking out every little thing into its own component to make it very reusable and very flexible, which we did a pretty good job of, in my opinion. We want to do the same with this unordered list, right? I think that would be very beneficial. So why don't we go ahead and do it? So we're going to go ahead and create a new component here. We'll just call it users list. And we're going to create a users list.js. Do our usual stuff. Ooh. Import from React. I can't type today. Users list. We'll just set up the bare bones stuff that we're going to need for this component first before we do anything else. We're also really getting into prop types. Remember, prop types, good stuff there. So we'll do the users list, prop types. Getting it set up again. I'm gonna have interactive building this component with the audience here today. So it's gonna be fun, huh? For default users. All right, so this is just our shell for right now.
So when you do the topic, so is it, I mean, because it seems obvious, when you're in that other form, what you're going to send in. Is it because you're going to reuse it that's what you're trying to prevent in case somebody else doesn't know?
Yeah. So Kui was asking, the prop types, it seems obvious in some of the other components why you would have certain props versus others. And is the prime objective of the prop types just to make these components more reusable or safer to reuse? The answer is yeah. If we have the prop types defined, it's easy for someone to look in the file really quick and just see what they need, and it'll tell you the exact type too, right? So you'd say, hey, I need this obscure thing. Just say it has a weird property name, like it's, I don't know, ID, right? ID could be a number, could be a string, could be anything. But if we explicitly say we want the ID to be a number, it's a little bit easier to know what exactly we're going to expect in there and how we can use it, right? Because you can't do I guess you can't do like a string divided by a string, right? But if you decided you wanted to divide the ID or something weird like that, right? That's a number-only operation. It tells you could do that safely.
Is this mostly it's more convenient for, more useful for when you do custom components? Like, instead of like user form, maybe you'll have like a friend form or something. Like you don't know exactly what goes into friend.
Yes. So it's very useful when you're any generic component that you're building. It's useful just to add another layer of safety. So another use that we talked about a little bit last week was that if you pass in the wrong prop types, React will give you a warning on the console. So then that alerts you too that there's a component you're using incorrectly, which means there might be something wrong with your app. There might be something you can fix to make better. Those kinds of things. It's just extra warnings to give you an extra layer of protection to keep you from messing up. And that's really what's nice about it. So it's not necessary, and sometimes it's not that useful when you have like one prop coming in, but I think it's a great thing to make as a requirement on your React if you're not using something like TypeScript, where types are baked in. So this is really good. Darnell, you have a question?
On line 4, is that supposed to have curly brackets or the current?
Well, remember, if we're just returning a render function, like we're just turning HTML, we would, all we have to do is return in these parentheses. So we'll get there. We're not done implementing it yet. So this is just a shell of what we're going to need. We'll get there. When we're done, if you have questions about what I did, feel free to ask. So everyone got this little shell set up? Nice and simple. Let's go back to the app, and we're simply, to make it easy on us, just going to copy from this bottom UL to this top UL right here, 85 to 91. And we're just going to paste it in. Fix the indenting, so highlight it all, do a tab. In most editors that works. Cool. So there's a few things we're going to have to do if we want to actually make this a pass-through, stateless component. Obviously, this .state, that doesn't make any sense, right? We can't guarantee, it's not going to have state. We know that. And this, well, it's a just an anonymous arrow function here, so it's not going to have a this either. So it's a nice way to be able to eliminate what we're going to need to eliminate to verify that our props are going to be correct. So all we need, it looks like, is what? Users, a list of users, right? So great. We're going to do our destructuring right here in the function call. So we're just going to pull out our users right away. And it makes it very easy so you don't do props. I know we talked about this a lot last week. Makes it easy so you don't have to do props, then guess where all the props actually are. Cool. So we've got our users. It looks like that's probably the only one. But this is a really nice, this is an interesting prop that we get to look at for prop types, because there's actually two types going on here. Does anyone know what those are? There's two types that we need to define in prop types. Or I should say that's a little bit of a misdirection there. There's a parent type, and then there's a child type related to that type that we should define. Anyone want to take a guess at what I'm talking about? Users and user. Yes. So we have users, a list of users, right? Well, what is a user? Well, we're using information from that user object inside of our map here. So it might be nice to define that type as well. You know, I mean, just make it a little bit safer. How safe can we get? Well, safe as you want, pretty much. Great. So we know we have users, right? Let's define the prop types. And this is going to be a prop types dot array of is what we use. I know we did this for nodes or something like that, but we're gonna get a little bit more defined. So prop types array of, okay, it's a function. It takes in more prop types. You can see on my screen it has an array of and then type prop types.validator.any or any. Don't worry about that type signature. Just know that it needs more prop types. Taking a prop types right here, we can make a shape, which is another function. And you pass in an object syntax like the curly braces. Okay. So now we have an object. We know this is going to define our users. So let's look at the three props we have built on the user. We have first name, which we could probably guess is a what? String. Yeah. We have a last name, which I'm sure you can all guess is going to also be a string. And we have a welcome message, which is, I mean, also going to be a string. But should we make the welcome message required? No, why not? Might not want a welcome message. Maybe we don't have, if we decide to get rid of the welcome message, what say you? Whatever it is that we decide to do with the welcome message. I agree that in this instance, we probably shouldn't necessarily require it. We are using it though inside of the LI. So we may not need it one day, but right now, we probably will require it just because it's the only thing used in there. Now, if we had more stuff decorating this user list, we may not need it to determine that a user exists. But the welcome message, if we remember, and it's hard to tell from here, requires a first name or a last name. So if both of those are required, then the welcome message is necessarily going to be there. So we'll keep it required for now, but we don't necessarily need it. And we'll keep this array of users required for the moment, just because we're going to need it or we're not going to ever process this array, right? So have I talked about shape? I have not talked about shape, but I can. What questions do you have about shape? What is shape? That's a good question. Shape basically defines the shape of an object, right? So you're going to get some object that's going to have a set of properties on it. Shape is how you say, this is exactly what I want it to look like, okay? There's like an object one, prop types.object, but that's just anything that happens to be an object. So shape is the way that you get a little bit more specific with what exactly the object is. Yes, it's going to be an object. Cool. So we have our prop types. I cleaned it up a little bit, added some annotation. Whether you think it's better or not, up to you, but I did it. Everyone got this? People still copying it? Cool. Any questions on any of this? Got a bunch of questions? That's okay. That's okay. When you come up with one that you really want to ask, just let me know and we'll go for it. Okay. So what do we got to do in that user list? The users list, we got to add our index.js to export it. Export default users list. Right. Okay. Now, if you don't remember the syntax, we have it all over the place. So a good thing when you're repeating syntax is to just look at past examples because they're all going to do exactly the same thing. And that's really nice. Right. So this is all good. We're all good. Great. Now we're ready to move back to our app and hopefully abstract away the last of this little extra component here, and that'd be really great. Then we could talk about Redux. Okay. Whoa. Board users list from users list. Now I've got that component. Should be as simple as just users list users equals this dot state users. Okay, we can delete this. Hopefully we don't get any errors here. Looking good? Everyone on board? Cool. So let us pull up this bad boy. Make sure it's still good. Whoa. Open the console. Okay, we got no errors. Carson, Howard, looking good. Don't have any prop errors, so our prop types must be okay. What if we just do a first name? Name worked okay, no problem. Let's just do a last name. Last name worked okay. Cool. No name, we can't. Remember, we added logic to say we couldn't press the button if there's no name. I can press it all day long. Cool.
See, that's why I'm like, okay, so then why would you even have the prompt types that require that if here, like you couldn't even enter?
Well, here I can't, but what if I build another form that has this list, right? These are reusable components.
Right.
So I don't necessarily need to have like that logic's decoupled. That's in a different form altogether. So it's possible that I could eventually have, that's a really great question, by the way. It's possible that I could eventually reuse this users list component somewhere else where I might get bad user information, right? In that case, we want to verify that the users coming in have the proper shape, everything's good, so that we can correctly build that users list. So that's a great question. Kui asks, why would we use the prop types if we can't even add a user when those fields don't exist? And the reason why is, well, the list and the form aren't coupled together. They're not the same component. So you could use this list somewhere else where the form doesn't exist and add users with bad info. We don't want that. Cool. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Redux. Unless anyone else wants to look a little bit more React, I think it'd be cool to spend time talking about Redux and what Redux does, how we can get it in here, and what we can do to make our app a little bit better.
Can you click on app.js?
Can I click on app.js? Yeah. You want to see that?
Yeah.
Cool. So Redux, let's just brief overview of what is Redux. And Alex, if you wouldn't mind slacking out some like the good resources you have for Redux, like videos by Dan Abramov and some of the Redux documentation would be fantastic. Redux is a state management library, basically. And what it's used for is taking all this stateful code that we're doing in our React components, moving it somewhere else altogether. So we don't got to worry about it anymore. The nice thing about it is you never have to build a stateful component again. They can all be just these pure pass-through components, which you can imagine makes it really, really easy for testing and reusing components and stuff like that. It's a cakewalk. Redux makes it really nice. There's a couple of things we have to do to get Redux to work. So I'm going to show you, we're going to do two things. I think we have plenty of time to do it. We're going to create a new React app really quick. We'll just do it together. And I'll show you the very basics of Redux. And then we're going to add Redux to this. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and open up my terminal. I'm going to close out this app. Let's go back into our testing. Create React app. First, I have a Redux test or something in here that I was doing this with before. Create React app, and we're just going to call this Redux test. Okay, so we've all done the create React app. No sweat. I'll open up this project again in a little bit, but for now, we're just going to minimize it when I talk about Redux, unless anyone has an objection. Nope. Cool. Okay, so we did the create React app, right? Let's cd into our Redux. Oops, there's two packages we need to add to get Redux to work. And we know we're going to do Redux, so we might as well add them right away. One of them is Redux. Oops. The other one is React Redux. That is a Y. I just can't type. All right, let me expand this. I know it's hard to see, but you can do both in one line like that. So yarn add Redux and React Redux. Sure, tangent question.
How do you know where to add when you do the yarn add? You're doing it in the client or the?
Well, remember, we're just doing create React app. We don't have like a source, or not a source, a server right now. So yeah, it'd always be in your client.
Always in the client.
Yeah, you create a React app. You're going to have a directory built from there. You're going to go in that directory, and that's the start of your client, right? So I do ls. You can see I have my package JSON, README, all that fun stuff you get with the create React app client. Right there, that's where I'm adding it, to that package JSON. If I show you the package JSON too, you'll see I have React Redux and React Redux now in it.
But it has to get installed in the client.
Has to be in the client. It's the code that is delivered to the front end, to the client, to the browser. Like that's where you want Redux. You can use it in Node, sure. You definitely can. It's very flexible, but usually people use it in React.
Are you on an Ethernet?
Mine Ethernet? No,
Your
I'm
yarns are going like 4 seconds faster than mine.
Are they?
Yeah,
No.
right there.
I'm just on Wi-Fi. I just have, well, I do have a Linux machine.
Here we go. I know.
So, yeah, let's get into the
Sorry
Linux
for asking.
elitism here. Okay, so everyone installed Redux and React Redux? Yep. Cool. I'm going to open up this code. Oh, that opened up that other package. Oh, because it was still open. My bad. Let's open this up in Visual Studio Code. What the hell? I have no idea what it's doing. I'm gonna do it again, probably. No, it's just opening shit up. Oh, it's opening up my old code.
Yeah.
Cool, see? No, this is different altogether. All right. So we have a really basic create React app, right? So everyone should be here. Where we have this app extends component. There's like nothing here going on at all. It's really lame. So a typical example people use with Redux is just like a button, an increment button, right? We click a button and it increments some state. So that's what we're going to do. It's really simple to make. So there's a few components to Redux. What Redux comes in as a package. It exports this one function. Well, there's a few, but there's one function you're mainly going to use called create store. And this store is when you add all the components to Redux, it's basically like the one thing you need to manage state in your entire application. You only need one store to get all of your state saved. And it saves it in this big giant object tree for you. It's fantastic, right? But there's a couple of other parts too. There's something called the reducer. And the reducer is basically one giant function that takes in your state, your current state at the time you execute the reducer, and it takes in an action, the last thing you did to modify your state. Okay? That's all it takes in, and we're going to build one of these. Then there's one other thing you need to, and that is you need your actions. So your actions are basically a way to tell Redux how we're going to change the state. And that can be very complex or it can be very simple. It's nice to keep each action very simple, and then they can chain together to build a very complex state transformation, right? So there's kind of a few moving parts, but we're going to go ahead and get it set up a bit here before we actually build the reducer and before we build the actions. So in your index.js, there's a couple of things we need to import. So let's go ahead and import create store from Redux. And we're going to import provider with a capital P from React Redux. Those are two things you need to import from those two packages in your index.js. This is your top level index.js for the entire project. And then we're going to write this code here, which we can't do anything with yet. Const store equals create store. And then there's going to be some stuff that goes in here. So actually, if I open up, oh no, it's not working. Lame. Well, my autocomplete's not working for you, which sucks. So you can't, it's not showing the nice type definitions. But basically, this create store function takes in a reducer, and it takes in the initial state of the application. So you can populate what your state should look like before you've done anything. And so this could be really great. Say you want to preload some information, right? You start up your app and you want to preload, either maybe you have some cookies and you want to preload the user that's logged in, or you want to do a whole bunch of stuff. You can populate it into Redux before you do anything. So this is where you would do it. So right now we're just going to write this. Store is going to be empty, okay? And then we're going to do a function. We call it our main component. It's not going to take anything in. It's going to be our typical like React component definition. Top level component is going to be a provider. And inside of that, we're going to have our app, okay? That would be this guy. App. And then on the provider, you can create a store. Oops. It's got one prop, the store. And you set it equal to the store. Like that. Lastly, we're going to place this app in the React DOM.render with our main component and just call it because it's a function, right? And we want that component out immediately. You don't need to make it a function like I just did, but if you need to do any rendering or whatever, or you know, whatever you wanted to do, you can. This is just to show there's a lot of ways to get that initial value populated. Okay, so we have the store set up. We have our provider set up. We have everything set up to use Redux, but Redux isn't quite done yet, is it? So, like I said, we need two things. We need actions. We need a reducer. And they're both very simple. There's a lot of ways you can do these. So we're going to create a reducer. Whoa, reducer.js. First thing first, reducer.js. No. Let's create another empty file. We're done with that. We're going to call it actions.js. Now, obviously, the way I'm writing this isn't probably ideal structure for a large application. You can imagine Gitkraken, we use React Redux, okay? We have hundreds of reducers and hundreds of actions all over the place. So there's lots of ways you can organize this, but for the simple app, I'm just going to show you how to do it at a very basic level. So we're actually going to start with the actions because they're a little bit easier to define. So, like I said, we're doing a very basic app where we have in state a value just starting at 0, and we're going to increment that value over time every time we press a button. So just from 0 to however many times I press it. That's all we're going to do, nothing too fancy. So we need to define our action types and the actions we're going to use. So what exactly is an action? It's an object that's passed to Redux that has a type specified on it or has something specified on it so your reducer can determine what it is, okay? So first thing we're going to do, we're going to define a constant, increment. It's just going to be a string, increment, okay? That's the name, that's the type of our first action. It's going to be increment. Very simple. Then we're going to export a function. We're going to call this increment. How about that? And all it's going to do is return an object with a type of increment. Now this all looks very simple, and it is. It's definitely very simple. And there's a lot you can do with the state transformation. So this won't give us everything we're going to need to do our app, but we'll see a lot more in-depth Redux in our app than we're going to see here. But I just want to get you familiar with how the setup is. Okay.
With EX6, do you need to type return?
With EX6, do I need to type return? No. So I could change this. Do I need return? No. I could change this and put parentheses around it. Same thing.
Okay.
Good question. Okay, so now we know what our actions are. One thing that might occur to you as we go further is, hey, should I define my actions first or my reducer first? And that's a good question. Probably your actions, right? Because what can you do in your reducer to change the state if you don't know what your actions are? Not much. So let's go ahead and import our actions. We're going to need that. We only need the action type, okay? You don't actually need the action here, just the action type. So it's nice to have them in similar files or something, so it's easy to find them. And we need to build our reducer. And the reducer takes in a state, and it takes in an action. Then we're just going to export default reducer. Okay, so what exactly is the reducer? Well, the reducer is a place where all of the state transformations happen. But there's a few rules in Redux. One of them, a really important one, and we talked about this a bit, is that the state is immutable. So when you get a state passed in to this reducer function, you should not change it directly. All the changes you make should end up creating a new state that you will return from this function. So if you make a change, you have to take everything out from the current state, put it in a new state, and shoot it back out. So this is where spread becomes really, really handy because it totally avoids that problem, right? So typical way you'll see this flow is a switch statement, okay? And we're going to switch on our action.type. Why are we going to switch on action.type? Because in my action, I specified in that object a type. This is good practice. You should specify a type, or it's going to be really hard to determine what these are. And I called it increment, okay? And we're going to just test for increment. One thing you may be wondering, and it'd be a good thing to wonder, is what does our state look like? We have this state coming in, but what are we even getting, right? How do I know what I'm going to edit? Doesn't make much sense. Well, another thing we get to define is our initial state. We can do export const initial state. This is just going to be an object. And for this little project, we're just going to make one property count, and we're going to set it to 0. So this is our entire state tree, okay? Now, you'll hear state tree. It's really just a giant object. State graph, state object graph, whatever people call it. State tree, you know, a bunch of things. This is the entirety of our state. It just has one property called count. It's just an object. That's all it is. Nothing fancy. So does anyone want to take a guess, a wild guess, as to what we're going to do to this state when we get the action type increment? What was that, count plus plus? Effectively, why can't we do count plus plus though? Yeah, well, we can't do count plus plus because one, if we did it on the state, we'd be mutating the state. Two, if we pull it off the state, well, we have to set it to a let and then do plus plus. When it'd just be easier to do count plus one, right? That's all we got to do. So remember, we can use that fancy spread, get everything we want out of state, and it's not a huge deal right now because, well, we only have one thing. But as your state grows, it's important to take into account all the other things that are going to happen, and you kind of want to future-proof your code a little bit because, I mean, in any real application, I'm going to have more than one property on my state, right? Good idea to preface everything you do with ... state. And what does that do? Tui, you're the man, right? You're spread man now. What does it do?
Takes it out, whatever's in the old state, and assigns it. I thought it was you were going to assign it to something.
We're going to, but you're right. You're right. So what Kui said was it takes all the stuff from the old state and puts it in the new state, puts it in this new object, and that's true. So if I left it at this, if I just did this and returned the state, what would I get? Same thing? Same exact thing, count of 0, right? So we can't do that. So what we're going to do instead is state.count plus 1. So if we do this dot, dot, dot state first, it doesn't matter what we're getting from the old state because it will immediately assign count equal to 0, right? If I follow that with the same property that exists in state, and if I'm just doing it again, I'm going to override what's there already. So just this would set count to 0, but since I have my own count after that, I'm setting it to 1 explicitly. It's going to override that. Right? It's done. There's one more thing we want to take into account, and that's if we don't have an action type or something goes wrong, okay? We want to just simply return the state. We're not making any changes. It's okay to return the state, right? That's perfectly fine.
You don't have to return dot, dot, dot state.
Nope. Because we haven't made any changes to it, it's okay to just return it. As soon as you go to make a change, you can no longer use the same state object. So you either got to do a clone, or you got to do this dot, 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 or you got to do something to return a new object. You don't want that same reference coming through. If you mutate state, you broke Redux.
Like, I'm trying to understand. That's why I got kind of lost. Like, there's a state that you pass into the release. So how does that get linked up with initial state?
I'll show you. One thing you can do is if you remember the default assignment, if you want your state to always be guaranteed to be the initial state, that's one thing you do. Because then if it comes in as null for some reason or undefined, it's automatically just going to set it to initial state. And you're good. You're gold. You're off on initial state. That's one way, but you actually tell Redux what you want your initial state to be when you're defining the store. That's a reducer. That's all there is to it. It's pretty simple, right? Anyone have any questions on this? What's up, Darnell? How come we don't have to use this dot state dot count on line 14? Because we're passing the state in the function. Exactly. That's exactly correct. And remember, this is an arrow function. Does it have a this? Nope. Arrow functions don't have this. So this isn't a React component. I think something that confuses a lot of people, because React and Redux are used so often together, pretty much always, they think they're the same. Or like they're part of the same library or something. Redux has nothing to do with React. It just so happens that the way React is written to work as like this props mechanism that passes down is exactly the same as Redux in a lot of ways, and works really well with Redux. Like they can perfectly, work together without any problems at all. So it's like a fantastic marriage of two different libraries.
Sorry to harp on you, but so if when you just said state, if you didn't say it was equal to initial state, that automatically means it is. Is that an ES16?
You mean what's
logical to me.
What's the difference between this and just passing in state?
Yeah. Like how does that work?
So what happens is, if this is called default parameters, right? You can set a default parameter, and it says if state comes in and it's null, I'm going to assign it equal to initial state. And yes, this is an ES6 thing. And if you look at the babbled code that comes out, it will actually say like state, and then the function will say if not state, it says state equal to this. That's really what it boils down to. So yeah, it's ES6. It's just inline syntax to initially to quickly say, hey, if this is null, I want it to equal this instead. Because it's bad news. I would say in like 90% of the scenarios you run into, it's bad news to accept null or undefined parameters into any function. It just ends up being a lot of work. So this is a really great way to determine that. And we could actually, even on action, if we want to guarantee that that won't be null, and we really want to be crazy, we could say type unknown or something, right? So now we always have an action that's going to come in with a type, so we don't got to check for null here either. We'll just never match on unknown. As long as we don't match on unknown in this case statement, we're good. It'll just always return state. So cool. We just killed two birds with one stone. Action should never come in as null unless you dispatch null. And if you do that, you're not using the library right, but I guess it could happen. So, I mean, this may be more dangerous than it actually is helpful, but I guess it depends on how you look at it. So any more questions on the reducer before we go ahead and build? Yeah, Cody?
So line 13 is just saying count. So that's
In this case, yeah.
Replace it with that and do the same thing. Right in this case.
In this case, yeah.
Okay.
You
So-
could replace that with count
so
zero.
So it's an object. So is that the second line on line 14 overriding that first one?
It's overriding the specific property. If I had another one in here, it wouldn't override name.
Right.
Name would still come in as woo, but count would then change to count plus 1. So
It
it'll,
just changes the value.
it just changes the value.
Just changes the value.
So you can do this with anything. You can even nest it. It's crazy. You can do all kinds of stuff with the spread syntax. It's really powerful. So where did we leave off? Well, we had this create store. It was doing a whole bunch of fun stuff, but it wasn't quite done yet. Like I said earlier, we're going to need the reducer. We need some information to finish this up. So we know we can import the reducer. From our reducer file, right? But there's another thing. We also exported the initial state. So I think it was Nikki last week asked, hey, how do we import a default and a non-default? And this is how you do it. Because remember, our reducer is our default export. And this is going to be everything else. And in this case, we only want initial state out. So we have initial state, default reducer, right? So that's how you would import both the default and the non-default, the rest of the garbage that comes with it. So how do we plug this in? Plug in our reducer, plug in initial state, voila. We have a completed Redux state store. So that's all well and good. We've got it even plugged into React, so React knows about it, but we're not using it. We're not using it anywhere, right? It's just, we just have this state that's fantastic. What are we going to do with it? Well, this is where the fun comes in. Everyone good on the index.js before I move on? So we're going to our app.js. We're going to have to import one thing. Go ahead and import, called connect from React Redux. I told you we're not going to have to use stateful components anymore. And even though this doesn't have any explicit state, because it extends the component, it's technically a stateful component, right? It's allowed to store state. No one will stop it. Whereas if you just have the function, it literally can't store state. There's nowhere for it to put the state. So with that in mind, there's a lot of things we can change. This render function, don't even need it. I can build this to just be a function. Just like we were doing with our pass-through components earlier. Class. Oops. Right? Const app equals take in nothing, effectively. And return us some fun code. So also, well and good. Okay, well, we don't have any state yet. We do, but we're not using it, right? Well, how do we get it in? But connect that we imported from React Redux is actually a multi-stage function. It is a function that returns a function, so it's a higher order function, okay? It has several parts. First thing we're going to do is call a connect function. Leave an opening, but don't do anything. And then after that, we're immediately going to call the return function from connect and pass it app. So this is our shell for getting our props, which will end up being just the state from Redux into this app. So connect is funny. It's a function that takes in a bunch of things. But there's two things, the first two parameters of connect, that are the most important. The first thing it takes in is a function that's typically called map state to props. Does anyone want to take a guess at what that means? Maps the state. That's exactly what it does. It takes the state from Redux and then you can tell that what you want to return to your app component as props. State to props. Takes in the state, easy peasy. In this case, it's just count. And we can use Alex's fun syntax because we're just going to be returning an object. Call it count. Put state.count. Now, you might be saying, oh, well, why can't I just do the spread? I mean, you could, because we only have one property. But in the instance where you have a ton of stuff going on in state, you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to be very explicit as to what's going into the props. So, like I said, it's the first parameter. You just go ahead and map state to props. So let's talk again about the objective of this app. What's its functionality going to be? The functionality is we're going to have this count be passed in through the app. We're going to assign it to maybe a p tag or something, right? So we can see the value. And then we're going to have a button that says increment. You click it and it increments the state. So that means we're going to need an action. Right? You know, in a stateful component, you could just add a function to the class, handle submit click or handle button click and increment the state, no problem, easy peasy. But if this is a stateless component, we're passing state all the way in, that means you can't even have actions on this component. You have to pass them in through props. And that's what effectively everything becomes is props. So the second thing Connect takes is map dispatch to props. Map dispatch to props. And that takes in this fun function called dispatch. It will also be returning an object. It will do something. And that's pretty cool. So what do we need? We need an on increment click. This is going to be a function. It's an anonymous function. Nothing fancy. And it's eventually going to call dispatch. But we're missing something. We have to dispatch something. What do we have to dispatch? Dispatch state? Close. Remember those actions we made? Increment. There's an increment action we made. I think we called it increment state. This increment state function. You're simply going to call, oops, I don't know what that did. You're going to call dispatch. Why does it keep, it's auto completing. It does, this is not like me. You're going to call dispatch. We're just going to execute increment state, that function. Remember, it's a function inside of dispatch. You don't got to return dispatch. It's going into the store, okay? So might be a little confusing because we're not returning anything. Like we're just calling this magical function that we get passed into this other function. Like, wow, that's crazy. Well, it turns out the store has a function on it called dispatch that you can use to basically post to state, hey, something's going to change. And what that eventually does is invoke your reducer with that action and the state at the time that you executed that action. So remember, our reducer had state and action, right? So it's going to take the state at the time that I pressed this button or I executed this function and the action I used. In this case, it's the increment state, which had one property type with the name increment. So it's going to be the second thing we pass in, map dispatch to props. Make sure that's all good. Come together. But we still don't have it in our app. But that's pretty easy. We told it what these prompts were called, right? Count and on increment click. Inside this app intro p tag, let me create my own p tag. I'm just going to call it count. I'm going to write count. Oops. I'm going to pass in the count. I'm going to create a button. I'm going to set the on click and that button equal on increment click. And theoretically, we have this fully built app component now that can mutate state without actually having to know about it. We can make all these crazy changes to our app state without having a stateful component. That's pretty awesome, if you ask me. So why don't we test it out? And hopefully it builds. So if I didn't type something wrong, I probably did. We'll do yarn start. Make sure everything's okay. Hey, look at that. Now remember, every time the state changes, what happens? It re-renders. So there's no possible way my app could be holding this count information at all. It's not possible. I think I should. I do, but it's not hooked into this. Don't you need the enhancers set up? No, it doesn't. So the Redux tools are really cool. We'll talk about them. I'll have Alex talk about them. Maybe Alex can show them before we leave. Oh, your computer can't get into this, can he? Oh, never mind. Alex can't show them. Why are you even here, Alex? Okay. So that's pretty cool. I feel like that's pretty cool. If we want to just do another quick test to see what exactly is going on, we can go back into our reducer. And why don't we, before we do anything in here, console log state. All right, let's watch the console. Don't worry about that error message. It doesn't mean anything important. I'm going to clear the console. Boom, count 0. Why is the count 0? Yep, it's going to log it before the increment. So if I hit it again, what am I going to get? Count 1, count 2, 3. Boom. That's our state. It's changing in front of our eyes, magically, because of Redux. Any questions on that? You could probably see by now that there's a lot you can do with Redux. There's a ton you can do with Redux. Literally anything you could imagine in terms of state management, you can pretty much do with Redux, which is amazing. And this is a very simple view of how you can use it. But we've got another hour. We're going to use that last hour to add Redux to our other app. Now, our other app's a bit more complicated, right? You trying to get a question? Yeah, of course. Let me just stop this. You don't understand why you'd use this?
From this little example, no.
Well, yeah, this is a trivial example that doesn't do anything.
Yeah. That's why we're waiting for you to do the second part.
Yep.
And I think that's where it's gonna.
Well, I wanted to make sure you guys saw how it worked in a simple context, right? Because I could go into our app, but you might miss the little details of like, what's a reducer? What's an action? You know, all these things tied together because there's so much we would have to do up front to get it to even work. I wanted to do it in a really simple way. So it was like, oh, okay, this is the basics of Redux to make Redux even work. We get it. You may not get like the benefit of it quite yet. And I don't even know if our little app will truly expose that benefit to you, but it'll make it a little bit more apparent, I think. Do you at least understand the general idea behind what Redux is and how it works? You don't gotta understand why we care.
Yeah.
You just gotta know what it is.
Okay.
You kind of get what it is? A little bit closer?
Well, I mean, it's managing the state part.
Right.
And that's separate from your app.
Right.
So,
But you're still talking about
the
why we care though.
Yeah.
I don't care about why we care. What is it? It's just this little library that takes in an action, takes in an object, and changes the state. Right. And then it spits out that state back to our React components. Whenever you need it. That's all Redux is.
Okay.
There's nothing more to it. It's incredibly simple at its core. You got a question, Darnell?
Yeah, so the map states of hops and the dispatch that's coming from connect.
Well, that's just a function.
Okay.
But the stuff that is coming into those functions, that's coming from Connect. It's actually coming from Redux, but Connect does all the work to set it up.
So those are required to, like those are our set functions.
If you're going to use Connect, they're almost always required because you're almost always going to need, well, you're going to need state to come in somewhere, right? So you're going to need mapped state to props. Now, if for some reason you have a set of components that literally do not need to change state at all, then you wouldn't need dispatch to props. But odds are you're going to change state too, right? What's the point of having the state you show if you never change it? You might as well just have like a static website, right?
So it kind of just takes state management out of your components.
It takes state management out of your components. Well, yeah, I mean, less confusing is one thing, maybe. Redux adds a layer on top of it, so it might make it more confusing, honestly. It makes your apps, your components, a lot simpler, though.
Okay.
They're a lot simpler. Look at how much code is in there. If I had to build it so it was a stateful component that managed the count and did all that, I would have functions on it and everything. So I still have those functions in a way.
Yeah, it just exports.
Yeah, they're just moved out of here. So when I want to look at what the component is rendering, I want to see what my UI is actually doing. I just got to look at that HTML right there, the JSX.
Redux tools, you can see the state change real time.
Yeah, so there are Redux tools that Alex was talking about. If we have time, we'll try to get him to work for the other app that lets you see the state, and it actually registers the state in Chrome, the Chrome tools, every time it changes, so you can go back and look at the state history forever. So they're pretty cool. Is everyone ready to move on from this and go try to do this in our app? Yeah? Okay. All right. Well, apparently that wasn't exciting. All right. So let's get to our Bootcamp app. First things first, yarn add Redux and React Redux. Okay. That went pretty quick. Good, that's all in. Now we're back. Voila. So the good news is we still only have one component, so the state's not super complex yet. But it's certainly getting there, right? It's getting a lot more complex. And for sure, it'll definitely be, like in a real app, it's going to be complex always. So let's go ahead and try to get Redux started. So let's do a little bit better structure. I'm just going to collapse these for now, but we'll be back. First thing first, let's import, create, store from Redux. One thing I like to do, and I don't remember what these are called because I usually have autocomplete working for me, is I'll do like import from nothing, React, Redux, or whatever, or import nothing, and then I should be able to, look, it tells me provider. So now it's working. That's good. So here, I'm actually getting the autocomplete type signature for the create store, which is really nice, really helpful. So I know we haven't done a lot of types in this class, so it's kind of hard to read this for most of us, and it's hard to read even for me because the type signatures they're using here are weird. But basically what it's saying is we have a few options, and we're going to use this option, which is we have a reducer, which is a function that takes in a state of type S, so that's anything, whatever you decide state is, and an action of any action, so that's anything you decide an action is, and returns S, which is the same type as state, right? So it returns state, again, something of the same type. Not necessarily the same thing, something of the same type. And if you know a little bit about types, we've been working on them in Java. The type is just kind of like the contract or the rules defining some data. That's all it is. And the rules defining the state or whatever we say they are. And then it also takes in preloaded state. That's the next thing, right under that reducer of type S. So you see that type S, state type. It shows up a few times through here. And that's going to be like our initial state. Okay? So let's see what we did here. Main component. Just copy that. Oops. Same thing we were doing before, where we had provider. Sure. 4. Here. That's going to take in our app. And there, we're just going to do main component, all that function. Great. So until we have a reducer and our action set up, we're good to go here. And I don't think it's going to take too long to set up the Redux in here. So we're going to try to get a little bit fancier after we get it set up initially. It's how we build our reducer and how we build our actions. So I'm actually going to, because I want to start on the reducer, I'm going to create a new folder separate from our components. What you name this is kind of up to you, whatever makes most sense to you. You can call it state or something like that. What we usually just call it is domain. Why domain? Because there's a common term in development, domain logic. Does anyone know what domain logic would be?
Browser.
Not quite browser logic, no.
Serverless.
Not server logic, no. The encompassing what?
DOM. That's too
Nope,
broad.
not the DOM. Nope. Domain logic is basically the business logic. So say I create an app that, an e-commerce app like Amazon. What would the domain logic be? It'd be the pricing information, how I determine a price, the purchasing information, how I determine if you can make a purchase, quantity information. That's domain logic. So the reducers and the actions kind of facilitate domain logic. I don't know. I mean, justify the same how you will. That's just my little, my little soapbox about it, I guess. But you can call it whatever you want. Just I wouldn't put it with components. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Not components. Great. Go ahead and do that. So let's create our reducer.js and let's create our actions.js. I'm going to close up some stuff. The good news is, with all of the work we're going to have to do to bring Redux in here, this is pretty easy to isolate the state, huh? Oh, we know what that is. Right there. Great. Well, it's a little easy because we only have one stateful component. So we're kind of cheating. In a real app, if you decided to bring in Redux, it's not going to be a trivial thing to do. So we can set up our initial state pretty easily. That's no big deal. And we know that our reducer, oops, is going to take in the state. Oh my word. And an action. And return something. There's another way you can do the export default. You don't want to give it a name because you know the reducer is going to be the default. You could just do this. I don't typically like to. I like to give them names. But you can do it if you're lazy. So we can switch here. We're going to go ahead on our action.type. And right now, all we're going to have is a default where we're going to return the state, right? Because this trackpad, I swear, it's going to be the death of me. All we have is a default where we return state, so not a whole lot going on there. But that's a good setup. Before we go much further, go import that so it's done with. I'll go back to that since I know there might be some people who aren't done. That's going to be domain / reducer, right? Look at that. Before we do anything else, the store is technically done. Okay. People need me to go back to the reducer?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the reducer. Go ahead and finish this up before I move forward. All good here? Come on. Yeah, you're good? All right. So how do we break this up? Well, we got to figure that out. Well, remember the dispatch to props. We've got a few functions here already that we see. So we're probably just probably going to want to put some of those, maybe, into our dispatch to props. But besides that, what are we going to need to do to get the state built properly? So we've got a bunch of stuff going on. How are we going to define the actions? I guess is the first thing the first step we want to take. What's probably the first action we're going to want to deal with, right? So remember we have this form that has a first name and a last name. It allows us to change those. Well, we already have the handle input changed. So why don't we just build some way to have that function change state? Okay? So first action, let's just export const name changed. We'll just call this name _ changed. Remember, this is the action type that it's going to map to in the reducer.
Redux syntax, capital underscore.
Well, that's like constant syntax. Like if you're making a constant value that you're never going to change, you do the all caps with underscores instead of spaces.
That's in life in general.
It's like in most languages, yeah. Some languages are saying, oh, I don't do this anymore because you don't need to, but most of the time,
Best practice.
I would say it's still best practice. Then we're going to export a function. We're just going to call it name change. And we're going to input the name and the value. Kind of confusing. How about this? Name type and name. So why do I say name type and name? First name and last name. So why would we write two actions, one for first name, one for last name, when they're exactly the same, right? Or actually, I'll show a fun way that we can do this. We're gonna make name changed, right? Don't export it. Don't export this one. And this is we'll use Alex's favorite ES6 syntax. So we type name _ changed, name type, and name. Simple, easy peasy. Right? Why didn't I export it? Ah, that's the fun. So we can export two separate functions. What did I just do there?
Call of the function.
So this is something that is pretty prevalent in JavaScript and a lot of functional programming. This is almost a concept of partial application. It is, but not how you'd see it in most senses, most ways. But what I'm doing is I have a name changed function that takes in a name type, which is going to be first name or last name, and a name. Okay? The name is obviously the current value of that name. And instead of exporting it twice and having the user or the consumer of that function, the developer is going to need it, have to type in name change first name. Every place we want to change the first name, we're just going to build another function on top of that original function that takes in a name and automatically assumes it's going to be the first name every time you call it. And we're just going to call it first name changed. So this is a really simple example, right? So name change isn't a very complex method to begin with. It takes in 2 parameters. So, I mean, it's not a huge amount of work, but you do have to type first name. And if you really didn't want to worry about fat fingering it, you'd have to build like a constant or something and pass that around and import it so you would always get first name right. Where you could just build a function to do it all for you, do half the work for you every single time. And then you only have to do the other half of the work when you actually need to know it. We're always going to know first name needs to be first name. So there's no reason to type first name every single time. So this is just like a way to reduce some of the code later by writing a little bit more code up front. And it makes more sense when you have long functions that maybe take in a bunch of functions or do a whole bunch of work, and it's always going to be roughly the same work. It's a form of code reuse, right? It's a nice pattern. I like it. Makes me happy. Okay, so we have one action now, and then the dispatches, okay? So how are we going to use this? Right in here in the reducer. Shouldn't be too bad. Go ahead and do a case. We're going to have to import in our action type. So from the actions. So one thing that might be good practice as you go on using Redux in the future is when you start to get a lot of action types, maybe you want to define an explicit action types file and just put them in there. People do that too. We're going to return something, but there's going to be some work associated with parsing that action, right? It's got a few things. Call this change name. Take in state. Oops. Name type and name. Right? Does that make sense? Does everyone see why I'm doing that? Use Alex's handy dandy syntax. Or state, name type, name. And we're going to return change name. That's in our state and our action. Does that pattern look kind of familiar? That name type, name? Remember the handle input change we have in our app.js already? It's the same thing, right? But now I've moved it to Redux. Everyone good here? Need more time? Cool. So again, we look here. There's that name. We're pulling the name out of the event target. That's pretty cool. Effectively the same thing we're going to have in the reducer. And I actually just realized something, but I will get to that when we get there. Okay, so handle submit user. Kind of a big one, right? We have to add a user to this users list. And this is really the last major part of the state, I suppose, other than these functions we're going to have to eventually pass in. It's a whole lot going on here. So we're probably going to want to copy this because there's a ton of work happening, right? And that code's pretty reusable. So let's define a new action. A user, call it user added. Oops. User added. User. Type user added. Pass in the user. You can see the types, the actual functions. The actions we're calling are pretty trivial themselves. You don't want to do a lot of work in your action. You want to let the reducer do all the work. That's what it's for. Great. So we have our user added. We're going to need it in here. User added. And we'll probably want to make another function. Add user. Okay. Pull out the user, destructuring. It's awesome. But this function is going to be doing a whole lot. So before we copy it over, we're going to go ahead and return add user. You'll see a pattern evolve in these functions too, and you'll eventually be able to see how intricate you can make these reducers. So we need a lot of this stuff. Yeah, probably most of it. So I just copied it over except for the event prevent default. Obviously, we're going to have to make some changes. First thing, this.state. That's what we want here. Where do we want to pull the first and the last name from? Where is that? The store? State? No. How about the user? And this function right here, or this users, now this will come from the state. Right? Ooh, actually, we don't even need to pass this in here. So I have us passing in a user, but I'm kind of stupid. I wasn't paying attention. Do we actually need this user? Do we need this information from user? No, we don't. You were all right before. We can pull it all from the state. Because we're storing the change name in the state, right? Right above that. So this add user added function actually doesn't need to do anything. It just needs to tell us it's time to the users. Time to add the user we're currently building in state to this user's list. So most of our logic can stay pretty much the same. We're going to have new users. It's welcome message. We don't have that yet. We're probably going to have to take that, right? For now, the easiest thing to do is to literally copy it. Take it. Put it right here. So it's going to be a bit messy having all these functions in here. We can eventually move them. Just copy that over. And here, we're turning our new state, right? Do boom, dot state. In case there's other stuff we don't want to change. Last thing, return state here, because it no longer just returns nothing and no longer just fails. We can't add a user, we have to return the state. That was in our app.js. Yep, I moved it to the reducer. It needs to be used in the reducer to build that welcome message for the user, right? So that's where it's at. So add user now. Going to try to add a user. If there's no first name or no last name, it's going ahead and just return the current state because we don't want to make any changes. Otherwise, we're going to copy the users. We're going to build a welcome message for the new user, add them to the list, and then return the new state, which has our first name set to blank, our last name set to blank, and our users set to the new users array. So that means we could probably delete this one. What's the point of that? Nothing. And that means we can probably delete this one too, maybe. Yeah, we can. You got to remember though, it's event prevent default, kind of important. So it might be nice, since we have the template of it here, delete the logic that we now no longer care about. But remember, leave that event prevent default, just so we know. And then handle the input change. Now this is where I've made my mistake, but we'll get there when we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So state stored in our Redux reducer. Don't need that. I guess it's time to start building this into our stateless Redux component, right? So let's go ahead and import connect from React Redux. Let's slowly start making our changes here. I know these are going to happen pretty fast. So not slow at all, like I just said. Let's go ahead and delete handle input change. Let's just delete this handle submit user. And then we're going to have this render app. It's going to boil down to the return statement. Now I know we haven't passed our props in yet, but holy crap, look at how much cleaner that is. What are the two functions we're going to need to get this done? Maps what? Map state to props. First one. Oh my word. That's going to take in the state. And it's going to return an object. Next one we're going to need. Map dispatch to props. Going to take in a function called dispatch. And return an object. Last thing we need to do, set up our connect function that's going to take in our app. And we can map series. What the fuck? Map state to props, map dispatch to props. Just pass them in. We know we're going to need them. Easy peasy. So we already know what our original state was, right? Does anyone remember? Yes, no? Probably first name. Last name. And then users. Before we even bring in our actions that we're going to need to call, we can call first name, last name, and eventually need that. Users. This dot state is now unnecessary. And we're going to want our handle input changed. Might as well add them to props now because we know they're coming. And our handle submit user. Get rid of this. There's our props list. Pretty crazy. I'm going to clean it up a bit. Whoops. I moved two different files. Sorry. Whether you agree that this is cleaner or not, up to you. But it makes it a little bit more compact, especially on this screen. You're a little easier to notice. Now let's go ahead and bring in our actions. Domain/actions. We're going to bring in, did I not export that other one? We're going to bring in user added. And these name change ones, they'd be really great, but I forgot the input target returns the name you're actually changing. So we actually don't have any extra work to do. We can just go ahead and export name changed and get rid of these fun partial applications. It's a good concept, and in a lot of scenarios, it's very helpful, but I totally forgot that we get everything for free. When we get it for free, it's the easiest thing to do. So we'll take in the user added and the name changed. Those are our two actions we're going to execute. So let's build our map dispatch to props. We have handles input changed. Takes in an event. And in here, where we do our name and our value, our event.target, and we're going to dispatch name changed, name type, which will be name, and our name will be value. Then the other one we got, just handle submit user. Remember, this needs an event. Calls event.prevent default. Then it'll call dispatch, and it'll just call user added. Any questions on that? I know it's fast. Who needs to see what? Everyone good? Good, Laura? Cool. So what's our last step? Probably to run it, huh? Make sure we didn't botch anything. Possible. Always possible. All right, so the website came up. See if it works. Oh, Seems to work exactly the same. Now I have that in Redux. Fancy. Okay, there's a couple of things that I want to touch upon before we just talk about questions or anything else we'd want to see. First of all, splitting this into action types, actions and action types, probably a good idea. Okay? In a real app, you're going to have more than two. You're going to have more than three things in state. You're going to have a lot, most likely. It's going to get big. It's going to get bulky. Something else you could do is in your domain folder or whatever you call it, split it up by domain. In this instance, we're only talking about users. So these are going to be your user action types and your user actions. And then this bad boy will be your user reducer, right? And there's ways, if you look at the React and the React Redux, the Redux and the React Redux documentation, to chain multiple reducers together. And it's very easy in the beginning. There's actually a function you can call called the compose reducers or something. And you just pass them all in and it just, it knows what to do. So it's very easy when you follow the docs to build that. Other things you can do are manually chain them together. And sometimes you want to do that when you want a bit more complexity in your system. You want it to do certain things in certain places. And I usually just build it myself because it's not that much more work, depending on how you do it. It is more work, to be honest. But this build welcome message, it's great. It helps us a lot. But does it belong in the reducer? Probably not, right? It's not really a reducer function. It's a helper function. So I'm just going to do a little bit of refactoring. I'm going to create a helpers. Oops. From there, I'm going to copy this bad boy over. And I'm going to export it. Right? Now, we need this build welcome message. It's not here. Go ahead and import it. No problem. Easy to fix, right? But we made sure that the functions that are in here are really the only functions that need to be in here, right? We don't need to have anything extra because that would be kind of a waste. Now, switch statements are all well and good. And this is how you're going to see it in a lot of the documentation. So I wanted to show you this way. But I want to take a little extra time, since we've got a little bit extra time, to show you how I would clean this up to make it significantly better, in my opinion. And Alex may or may not agree. He'll probably agree. So what we're going to do, instead of having this crazy switch, is we're actually going to create an object. And we're going to call this we'll call this the reducer, okay? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a reducer. And inside here, I'm going to add my name changed. My user added. Class user. That's not right. And I can make a sweet change here. No function, return state. Otherwise, return function state action. I think that looks a lot better. Switches get pretty bulky. They get pretty ugly. And then you got to do it for like every case and all that stuff. And it's just kind of a pain in the butt. It's more code to write. I still have to do it for every case. A little bit more targeted, right? Does everyone see what's happening here? This is taking advantage of all the fun things that JavaScript allows us to do. And getting to this point of understanding why I did this would take the entire class, I think. for people to really understand why functions are so powerful and why JavaScript can be very powerful. I just created this object out of thin air effectively without doing any real extra work, assigned functions to the properties, and I can just execute those functions on a whim. So let's go ahead and start it back up just to make sure it still works. Because we did make a few changes, so you always want to check. Good. Again, if we want to look at the state and how the state changes, let's blow this up a little bit. I can go into this reducer. Log state, so we can see how a complex state changing might look, or more complex state, right? Okay, so that looks pretty good. We've got our first name, nothing, last name. Watch, this is gonna be cool. Add the user. Another change, you'll see first name, last name, nothing, but we have an array of 1. You can just open it up. You can see your entire state. It's amazing. You just add a console log, you can see everything that happens. Granted, you don't need this when you have the React Redux tools built in, which it's only 4. I know we started around closer to 4:30. What?
You don't have to build anything. So that was not computed.
Acts like everything's so easy. Airbnb?
Yeah. They use React Redux.
Oh, they have the
They have it enabled, yeah, so you can take a look at it.
cool. So let's go ahead and look at the Redux tools for Airbnb. This is what they look like.
Change header to auto. Yep.
Change this one.
Yep. The drop down auto. The first one.
Auto select instances.
Yep. Okay. And now we search for something. It should just update.
Oh, search on the page.
Yeah, on the page. The search bar like that.
Oh God. Sorry, the trackpad's really not sensitive. Try Melbourne. Melbourne. Okay, so let's look at how Airbnb's state just changed. Okay? So they have a pretty complex state. So the first thing you see is this init. Whenever you start your app after you call the store, what Redux does is it sends out this message, add init. The @ means it's a JavaScript symbol. Sets out add init, and that basically says, give me all the initial states I'm going to have. And let's build our mega state that we need at the end of the day. Yep. Search it, Redux Chrome Tools.
I slacked it out.
So you can see, hey, with the state at the exact moment, like this is a complex state, right? This is the state and how the state has changed. Every time I go to a new one, loading false, loading.
How many people usually work on this app?
This app, a lot.
Yeah.
Probably 5 or 10. When you get good with React and Redux, you can make a lot very fast.
Yeah.
It's an extremely iterative tool set. And you can see the difference between some of them too. Like, oh, this is what changed. The response changed. Like, this is a really sweet tool. There is some setup sometimes you have to do on your own apps if you want to do it.
You need a file name, initial state, and you pass that in as initial state. That's what that initials are on.
Really, you need the whole initial, just a file called initial state?
You can name it whatever you want.
I passed in initial state. Yeah.
That's the only thing you should do.
No.
So that shows the previous state and current state.
Yeah, it shows what changed. So the state had a true, and because of this Redux action, it changed to false. It had a list of null, and because of this Redux action, it changed to an empty list. And in this one, loading changed from true to false. And this response looks like it changed a lot. Explore eTab. Ooh, look at that. Look at all the stuff that changed. Crazy. So these are really nice tools, and you can imagine they're very, very helpful. when you're doing a whole bunch of work on a giant app to see what changed when. I clicked this button, it broke. It just pooped on me. I don't know. You can go to your Redux state and hopefully it'll tell you what pooped.
You can dispatch actions from there. So if you have like a login action, but you have to actually made a button to do it, but you actually have the login for it, you can dispatch it from there. That's kind of nice. It's really, really helpful when you're debugging.
Nice.
Or testing something.
I have no idea what is inspecting these for me, but probably still something related to Airbnb.
You could like create a user without that add user button.
Yeah.
For your
So you see down here that this little dispatcher. If you click on that, it's gonna bring up this little just some bracket. You can put your action type in there and the prompt you want to pass in. Of course, that actually helps out kind of work. You can time travel, which is kind of cool.
So when you open up the tools, it'll tell you what you need to do to get this DevTools in. And supposedly this is all you needed to do. So they say, bastards. Find out, why don't we add it in? We know where our store's at, right? See, Alex, if you're paying attention, you would see that I have initial state right there in all caps. All right, so recompiled. Go to our app. Hey, look at that. Name changed. Name changed. Name changed. Name changed. Name changed. Pretty cool, huh? It's really easy. Oh, this?
Yeah, so click on action right here. Next to this.
Oh, action.
Yeah. So if you go to raw, the third one, yeah. If you copy that and then change name, copy the whole thing, yeah. Paste that into the type and change the name part where the D is to something, anything you want. And you go. Yeah, I'll try that. Try it on the bottom right for this batch. Yeah, there you go. You see how you change that top? That's how you would do actions like that. So it's really helpful for debugging. I use that all the time.
That is very helpful. I have never used this before, so thank you, Alex, very much. I knew there was a reason we kept you around.
The only thing I have used is in test, but then everyone says it's really awesome, but I never. But it says it's good. It should be good.
Looks like you can write tests over the state.
Yeah.
Just right in there for jest. Cool. All right, so that's a basic look into Redux and how to use it with React. Does anyone have any questions on it? Not yet. No questions yet. It's one state tree, but you could have objects nested in the state tree. So what usually happens, so Tyler asked a good question, and it was, can you have multiple states in your store? And the answer is not really. You have one giant tree or one object. But like you could say, hey, I have my state, right? And then I have a users object, which handles all the user information. So users object would have first name, last name, and list of users. And then say I decided to have a customers or something, or vendors. I could have a vendors object in the main state that would have vendor information. And then I could do, I don't know, projects or something, right? So the idea isn't so much that you need multiple state, because you really don't. You just need one giant thing that holds all of your state. And that's what makes Redux so cool, is because of one, you're not mutating state. You can go back and you can see things like this, these Redux tools, where you can just see what it was at every step of the way. And two, it makes it pretty efficient to just quickly make changes.
Oh, so time problem. If you hover over that button right there, you should see some options. Jump. Hit jump. Yeah, you see a time problem. You can just go back and forth in time.
Because it's safe state.
Yep.
Save the state, yeah.
Yep.
So even on something as big as what was the website we were just looking at, like
Airbnb?
with their huge state that's going on, like it's still quick and convenient, no problem. Like,
Usually not, no. Airbnb. Let's try.
You're using the spreader on that whole object, and you might go and change tempo
You
things.
never want to pass in the whole state to a mile itself, like a container. You want to pass in what you want. You know, your stake is really big and you don't want to be that guy. We have that guy at work. That's
We don't like that guy.
stake and then using just like one thing out of it. Don't do that.
Yeah. So if you're very careful about what you pass into your components and how you mutate, so the spread, I mean, on Git Kraken, we have a huge state tree, and it's fine. So it works pretty efficiently. You know, I mean, our state tree is probably 30 or 40 substates, and then in there you have all the diffs of everything you've looked at. Like there's gigabytes of data sometimes in the wrong repos. You know, if you're in the wrong repo at the wrong time, there's a lot going on in there. So let's see, let's look at this. Let's see how snappy it is, right? Oh man, is it not paying attention?
Oh, it's because of the header thing.
Oh.
Yeah, you guys didn't. But no, it's really fast.
So I'm jumping, I'm making changes. I'm actually breaking it because it's changed the page it's routed to. And it must not be handling that very well or something. Or maybe the Redux tools can't handle it. But either way, I have changed the state.
Because they probably have like fetch something, then do something with the data, and do something else, and that UI doesn't change in between the states.
Yep.
So and it's really fast. So you
Yep.
it's fast, sure.
It's really, really, really cool.
It also has the same exact thing built in.
Yeah, so the Redux actually, it came from like functional programming, because in functional programming, we talked about it a little bit last week, and there's something called immutability, where you don't actually directly change the values on an object or what say you just return a new copy of it. It's the same thing we're doing here. And a lot of those functional programming languages and paradigms, there's no way to just change the state like we can in JavaScript if we want to. And so you had to find a different way to do it. And they had these update loops, where it's called update, and you just pass in the state that changed. And it would just magically do stuff. So this is an older paradigm, but it was really well, it was like adapted really well for the JavaScript and the React kind of ecosystem. So other languages like Elm, once you're very familiar with React, looking at Elm, that's a fantastic segue into functional programming and some really advanced concepts, because Elm is client-side only, right? It's for building your websites. Totally functional language that compiles to JavaScript at the end of the day. You do all your HTML, CSS through it, and it has a lot of strong types like other functional languages. So I know it's kind of a segue, but it's a really great way to take your Redux knowledge and easily apply it to this totally new domain of programming, and it kind of makes sense. Syntax is goofy, so if you're not familiar with it, you'll definitely have to learn it, but it's a cool language. So any questions on our little project or anything we've done with React Redux? I'm going to go ahead and status on that. Git add. Okay, so now on GitHub, it's all updated with Redux, so you can go check it out. It's got the Redux dev tools in it, so once you've got those installed in Chrome, you can just download this bad boy and play with it. I know it's not very complex. Feel free to add complexity, and if you go in and you play with it and you add something really cool that's complex, go ahead and submit a pull request, and I'll look at it and I'll add it in. I think it's only going to be helpful to the other students. The only thing I ask is, unlike me, maybe comment some of your stuff so we understand the intent behind it, why you did something, why you think it's cool, stuff like that. But yeah, this was our intro to Redux. So I don't have much else planned unless you all have more questions or whatever. That's that. Ooh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
No problem.
I didn't unlearn anything here today, so that's a victory.
At least